So this session is called an introduction to leadership. And I guess introduction is the important word there, because the field of leadership is really, really vast. There's a lot to learn. And so this is just going to address a couple of things that will help you if you're looking to run for a particular role, but they're also really useful tips and tricks and things to know for non-leadership roles as well. And I'll talk about why that's relevant a bit later. So my name is Gemma. I run my own business, providing training courses, mostly to universities and student unions, but I do work with charities and corporates as well. And I kind of dabble in a lot of different things, from project management, conflict resolution to leadership. And I come at leadership from the view of what I call self-leadership. So as opposed to leadership and management, which is more about taking on a role and how to act in that role, self-leadership is about looking within and doing personal development first before you get into a leadership role. And so that should come through a little bit in this session. What we're going to be having a look at today is misconceptions about leadership, just to kind of demystify what it is and show you that it is more accessible than you think. Defining leadership, there's lots of different ways you can look at it. And so I want you to kind of explore what leadership means to you. The main bulk of the session will be having a look at a model of leadership styles, so that you can pick and choose more effectively what style you want to use in a particular situation. And then we'll round off by looking at how you can create a vision as a leader and how you can build trust as a leader. I like to work in an interactive way wherever possible. I know that this is a webinar session and that some of you are probably just listening in after a long day of study. But if at any point you want to unmute and ask a question, you're absolutely welcome to do so, as long as you don't mind being recorded. You are more than welcome to use the chat. And I can read out comments anonymously so that people who are watching this back on recording still know what's being asked, but doesn't know who has asked it. So please do ask questions, come up with examples and participate as much as you would like to, so that you get exactly what it is you want out of the session. If anybody wants to drop into the chat now, kind of what they're hoping to get out of it, or any key questions that you have, I can make sure to address those as we go along. So I will have the chat window open at all times to keep an eye out for those things. So what I'd like us to start with is just thinking about what leadership might mean. It may seem a little bit obvious, but there are so many different interpretations that it's worth kind of working out what definitions or ideas about leadership resonate with you. So the easiest way to do that, I think, is to show you a couple of quotes, and for you to just have a think about which ones you agree with, which ones maybe you might feel a bit uncomfortable about, or think, oh, that doesn't really make sense to me. And again, just recognizing that in yourself might give you some clues about what kind of leader you might be in a situation. Leadership is doing what is right when no one is watching. Leadership requires using power to influence the thoughts and actions of other people. A leader is best when people barely know he exists. When his work is done, his aim fulfilled, they will say, "We did it ourselves." A leader takes people where they want to go. A great leader takes people where they don't necessarily want to go, but ought to be. So feel free to drop in the chat, maybe a number 1, 2, 3, 4, which one speaks to you the most, or if any of them feel a bit uncomfortable to you. I think the first one is kind of looking at leadership in terms of integrity and morality, whereas the second is very much about goals and outcomes, perhaps about power. The third one is more about empowering others. And the fourth one is about perhaps making difficult decisions and pushing people. And none of these are right or wrong. You know, they're all just different interpretations. And these are just 4. There are so many hundreds of thousands of leadership quotes and ideas out there, and it's just worth flicking through some yourself to see what kind of sits with you. I haven't seen anything come through on the chat, so I'll move on. And again, this is not to kind of say that any one is better or worse than another. It's just for you to notice what resonates with you. So I want to have a look at some misconceptions in leadership to start with, because if I walk into a room and kind of say to a group of people who wants to be a leader, you know, not that many people put their hand up. Even in a workshop about leadership, some people think it's not for them. And it's usually these misconceptions that hold them back. So the first one is the idea that leaders are born, not made. People have this notion that, you know, I've either got the right stuff for it or I haven't. And if I haven't, that means that I shouldn't throw my hat in the ring. And that's something really interesting when you look at the idea of, you know, democratic processes as well, because the idea is that, you know, a government, a student union body is supposed to represent a broad range of people. And if a certain group of people are not signing up to be leaders because they think they're not born for it, it's not actually going to give you a representative group. The idea of leaders being born, not made probably comes from, I guess, our sociological history, in that certainly in the UK and in many global systems, we've had monarchies where power is handed down through birthright. So there's this idea that you're born to be the king or a leader or a ruler or a baron or whatever it is. There's also the idea of nature versus nurture, that certain personality traits are useful in leaders, such as charisma or intelligence, and that sometimes that can be genetic. You know, you might come from a family of highly charismatic or, you know, driven, ambitious people. And so the idea that you could be born with traits that would lend themselves to leadership reinforces this misconception. And to some extent, people argue that you might be born with certain values as well, and they could lend themselves to leadership. So there's some element of truth in it. However, any skill can be learned. You know, leadership is a skill. And if you want to take on a leadership position, as some of you are considering, you know, within the student union, but also in workplaces, in community, in family, you can always learn to get better. There is no one way to lead people. And so leaders are not born, because there's all these different ways of doing it. And you can learn to utilize whatever your natural style is. Our choices and our environment always shape us. You know, whether we want to or not, sometimes they shape us in ways that are problematic. Sometimes they shape us in ways that are really advantageous, and it depends how we interpret them. But we always have a choice. And so if you're hesitating about taking on a leadership role because you think, okay, maybe I'm not ready or it's not for me, you can learn to be a little bit different to what you are. You can learn tools, you can learn ways of being that would help you if that's what you want to do. The second thing is that people think leadership is about power. It's a position of power. And to some extent it is. Often leaders do have power. When we think of the word leadership, the first thing that comes to mind, I would imagine, for a lot of people are perhaps prime ministers, political leaders, Richard Branson, people running companies, Elon Musk, that kind of thing. We're thinking of people who are prominent decision makers who have some element of control. And so in that sense, this is true, but it's really important to remember as well that people without formal power can be just as effective leaders. So I'm sure you've had situations in a friendship group, in your family, where nobody's officially in charge, but people have displayed the qualities of leadership. They have inspired people or pushed people or helped the group to come to consensus, make decisions, and nobody gave them power in order to do that. It's also worth noting that there are different types of power as well. So leadership is often about the power of your role. I am in charge, I have responsibility, I have access to the resources. But you can have relational power, such as empathy and being able to influence. So this happens a lot in, sales situations. You can have informational power. If you look at the pandemic at the moment, the people who, the scientists who understand the more intricate details of how things work are the ones that are sort of leading, in theory, what we should be doing, because they have a power in what they know and their expertise. So one school of thought says that leadership is not a role. Leadership is about using whatever power you have for a worthy purpose. And so again, this can help to, I guess, empower people to feel that, okay, even if I don't have the job title of officer, manager, or whatever it is, I can still display high quality leadership in whatever role I have. The fourth misconception is that leadership is masculine. And I've deliberately put Margaret Thatcher on there because she was the UK's first female prime minister, but she did so in a very masculine way. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, and I'm not going to get into her actual politics, but just in terms of the way she was leading, I think a lot of companies and cultures have perpetuated the idea that leadership is synonymous with masculine traits, being forceful, being perhaps a little bit cutthroat in negotiations, being very direct. And that's probably because throughout human history, a lot of leadership roles in society have been dominated by men. Even if you go back to early civilizations like the Greeks, who, created the first democracies, only men were allowed to be educated, only men were allowed to vote. So the idea that leadership is masculine makes sense because leadership is a concept invented by men. And so there will be a bias towards masculine traits. That's what we are familiar with. We are familiar with leaders who are typically seen as strong, decisive. And so when we come to choose a leader, that might be what we look for. Oh, really good comment in the chat. Somebody was reading about how Margaret Thatcher took classes to lower the pitch of her voice to sound more masculine. So yeah, a lot of people who get into leadership roles or are training to be leaders, unfortunately feel they have to become more masculine in order to be respected. However, and I'm personally very excited by a lot of the stories recently about Jacinda Ardern and other examples of female leaders who are using their feminine qualities to their advantage. In recent years, and recent being maybe the last 50, which might sound like a short amount of time, but in terms of human history, that is quite short. The focus has been more about on emotional intelligence as a key tool for leadership. And I'll talk about that in more detail later. And so we're culturally changing to recognize that people can lead in different ways. It's not a bad thing to be a masculine leader, but it's not a bad thing to be a feminine leader either. They will be good at different parts of the leadership process. And the people you are leading are going to be a mixture of masculine, feminine, and perhaps even, in the middle, more androgynous. And so you need leadership that represents different kinds of patterns of behavior. So again, if anybody listening to this is thinking, I'm a bit more sensitive, or I can't be bossy, strong-willed, whatever it is, that's not a problem. And the fourth one is this idea that managers are leaders. Now, I'm going to very quickly say that obviously managers have a formal position of power, and some managers are excellent leaders. However, the definition of a manager is a person responsible for controlling or administering an organisation or group of staff. And so some managers are not leaders at all. They just kind of manipulate resources. they boss people around. And this image is widely spread on the internet of the, the boss telling the group what to do from behind a desk, when actually leadership is a little bit more involved and it's a little bit more personal. And in the bottom image, you can see that the leader is setting the example, showing the way. So management can be focused on numbers, outcomes and resources, whereas leadership is more about how people achieve goals. Yes, there will be an element of, budgeting, target setting and all the project management stuff. But if you went on a management course, you might not necessarily learn how to be a good leader. Depends on the values of the people running the course, I guess. Do let me know if you have questions. That's it in terms of the misconceptions, and the idea of me showing you those really is hopefully to encourage you to push through any worries that you have about signing up for leadership. Lots of people opt out of becoming a leader because they think, oh, it's not for me, or I've not got the right stuff. But with anything, you can learn to get there. And there's so many different ways of doing it well that there's room for a wide range of people to be leaders. So what actually is leadership? And I'm giving you a really broad definition here because there's so many different definitions out there. It's a relationship between a leader and followers. So it's not so much about, the power or the role, it's about the interaction. And often leadership is about achieving some sort of goal. So whether that's in a company, sales targets, whether it's in a school, you could have a leadership relationship between the teacher and student to educate. Within a student union setting, the goal is perhaps to achieve certain campaigns to represent the student body. And this definition is deliberately broad because it then allows for lots of different leadership styles to come into play. How you achieve those goals and how you treat that relationship is the leadership style. And I've put 9 on the screen here. Very, very different. Machiavellian is one of the very early leadership styles from Greek times that's very, people don't have autonomy, the leader has ultimate power. Where you have servant leadership, where the leader kind of slips back into the background and they do whatever it is the followers need to elevate them. There are so many different leadership styles out there that this webinar can only be called an introduction because I couldn't possibly go over all of them. But I wanted to just show you a few names to make you aware that there is no one way to be a good leader. There are loads of different options. I am going to show you some leadership styles, not the ones here, but some different ones. As I said at the beginning, there will be a handout emailed to you afterwards so that if you want to look any of these up, you've got the titles and you can do so in your own time. So the model I want to talk about is taken from the book Primal Leadership by Daniel Goldman and colleagues. And when I first read the title Primal, I was thinking, oh no, this is going to be masculine. It's about, primal cavemen being aggressive. But actually they've used the word prime as in prime number, the first. And they say the fundamental task of leadership is to prime good feeling in those that they lead. Which actually is quite is more on the feminine side of definitions of leadership. They're saying really, if you want to get teams to do anything, they first have to feel good. There's all sorts of different types of feeling good, which we'll go into. But if your team don't feel good, they're not going to get anything done. And so they use that to separate different styles of leadership into 2 categories. Resonant leadership is when the leader is in tune with the feelings and needs of other people. And if you know how your people are feeling, if you're connected to them, you can then communicate and motivate them to do what it is you want them to do. However, in dissonant leadership, the leader is out of touch with people's feelings and needs. And because they're out of touch, it means that they kind of push too hard or don't push enough or create friction. And in doing so, it undermines the process. And when people feel undermined, when relationships are damaged, people can't really shine and do their best. So I'm hoping this makes sense. Again, do feel free at any point to unmute and ask questions or drop things in the chat. As part of their kind of theory in their book, they outline 6 styles of leadership. And I like this because I feel that 6 gives you, as a listener, a lot of variety to work with, but it's not too many that it's overbearing. And what they say in their book is that all 6 of them can be resonant. All 6 of them can help people to feel good and ready to achieve goals and work together. But 2 of them often get misused. And what underpins all 6 of these leadership styles is the concept of emotional intelligence, which, as I said, is relatively recent in the leadership literature. When they talk about emotional intelligence, they put it in a hierarchy and say there's a group of skills that you can go through that really all leaders need. And they don't need every single skill, but the more of them they have, the better. So first of all, you need self-awareness. And this is about knowing what emotional state you're in, being able to assess yourself accurately, give yourself feedback, and having self-confidence. Once you're aware of yourself, you can then develop the capacities of self-management. So awareness is just knowing, but management is actually doing something about it. So controlling your emotions, being transparent with yourself, learning to adapt, seeking out opportunities to achieve new things, taking initiative and being optimistic. These 2 layers focus on the self. And again, this links to what I was saying earlier about me focusing on self-leadership. A lot of leadership webinars, discussions that I've come across jump straight into how to get the best out of other people. But if you haven't got these 2 layers of self-awareness and self-management, actually you might struggle as a leader, because until you've really sorted out what's going on within you, it's very hard to then manage other people. So after self-awareness and self-management, we can get to social awareness, empathizing with others. Organizational awareness is about knowing what's going on in your wider team. So, those of you who are successful in becoming part of the SU team, or anybody working in a job, do you know what the organization is trying to achieve, what the different departments and services are, how things flow together? And social awareness is also about a sense of service to other people. What is it you're trying to provide and do? Once you've got that, you can then manage the relationships by being inspiring, learning to influence, developing other people's skills, helping people to go through change, motivating them to do so, managing conflicts, building trust and bonds, and working effectively in a team. Now, I know I have whizzed through those. Do feel free to read them up in the book, and in the resources that I'm going to give you will be a little bit more detail about the definitions, as well as a chart that looks a bit like this, where you can go through yourself and give yourself a rating, out of 5 out of 10 in each of these skills. And what they said is that, you don't need all of them to be 10 out of 10, but the more of them that you work on and develop, the more likely it is that you'll be a high quality leader. And so even if you're not in a formal leadership position yet, working on your emotional intelligence is a really good investment for your career progression. So the 6 leadership styles. The first one is called commanding leadership. And this is about really just telling people what to do. This can come across in quite a negative way at times. Because it's often, there's not a lot of room for questions. They just tell people and expect it to happen. But that can prime good feeling. It can be resonant, because actually sometimes being told what to do gives you clarity and security that, okay, somebody's in charge, somebody knows what's going on. If you think about the pandemic situation, when government officials clearly tell you this is exactly what's going to happen and this is what we need you to do, it can be quite a relief. When you get mixed messages, that can be more problematic. So commanding leadership works really well when there's a crisis that needs to be managed. You know, imagine if there's a fire in the room, you don't want somebody to console and hug you and check you're okay. You want them to tell you where the nearest fire exit is and take charge. It's good if there is a time deadline. You wouldn't want to use it all the time because it might pressure people, it might make people feel anxious. But in short bursts, being commanded by somebody can give you that little bit of kick and motivation. So you might use it at the start of a project to kind of get people fired up. You might use it at the end to just kind of push over the finish line. Goldman said that this one is the most misused because I'm sure we can all think of commanding leadership that's been done really badly. I do not appreciate the show The Apprentice. I think the idea, you know, the way Alan Sugar behaves in there, which I'm not sure is the way he behaves in his real company, really is typical of commanding leadership, that I need you to do this, and he's a bit degrading about it. It's quite negative, it's quite controlling, and it leans into bullying. Now that might be done for, you know, TV entertainment, but in a real workplace, if we experience commanding leadership like that, you end up with a workforce that's really stressed, that they want to leave their jobs. It can damage, you know, emotional health, which then leads to other problems. So I'm sure we can all think of people who've acted this way. And remember that leadership isn't just about people who, you know, who are managers and bosses. You may have had teachers or family members or friends behave in this way, in positive and in negative ways. You know, there's the classic example of the parent who says, come on, enough's enough, I need you to clean your room now. They're commanding, but perhaps it's done in a good way because it gets you motivated. Just a reminder that if anybody wants to ask any questions or share examples as we go, feel free to drop those in the chat or to unmute. So the next style is called pace-setting leadership, and this is really about following the example that the leader sets. So the leader will, you know, do as I do now. They demonstrate what it is they want done and everybody copies. So it might be that they're demonstrating in the sense that it's a job induction and they show you how to do it and you copy, but it might also be about more subtle things. So you might have it in an office situation where, oh, well, my manager gets here at 8 o'clock in the morning, and even though they've not quite said it, they expect everybody else to come at that time because that's when they come. So sometimes it's very overt and obvious, and sometimes it's more subtle. This can be good. It can build resonance because people like to meet challenging goals. So if you have a pace-setting leader who's kind of saying, come on, this is the high standard and we're all going to get there, follow me, everybody, you can get a good sense of team morale. People feel kind of energized by it. So this is good if teams are motivated, if teams are competent, so they're able to follow along and keep up. If they're excited about rising to that challenge, it's very productive. This can also help if you need quick results. So again, in a situation where you're on a tight deadline, instead of telling everybody what to do or having long discussions, you can almost picture that production line way of going, right, everybody, this is how I need it done, copy me. And you can very quickly transmit information and get jobs done. A problem with pace-setting leadership is that it assumes people are able to follow. You know, if I show you how to use a filing system, maybe you can copy me. But if I show you how to ride a unicycle and just expect you to follow along, that wouldn't work, because it's a more complex task that requires longer practice. So leaders who are using pace setting have to think about how realistic it is people can follow that example. A lot of the pace setting leaders who do it badly lack empathy. So they expect people to follow them because they're good at it, and they forget that other people might need more time or might, you know, not understanding the same way they do. If you use this style too much, it can tire people out because it's often a style that pushes people, and that can create anxiety if it's done all the time. Another issue, which I haven't listed here, is that pace setting doesn't allow for creativity. So you can picture, if you're new to a role, you might have a line manager using pace setting at job induction to tell you this is how we do things and you copy. But if they did that for the whole time you were there, you know, a year in, you'd feel very restricted and that you don't have autonomy in your role. So small doses at the beginning of a role or when you're trying to meet a type challenge is useful for pace setting. Democratic leadership is probably the one that you're going to be thinking of most in you know, within a student union context. Lots of people, when they hear democratic, they think of voting elections, and that can be part of it, but actually it's more interpersonal than that. It's just about asking people what they think and having a space where everybody gets their input heard. So it's about participation of a group. So you get this in community meetings. You probably have this all the time in your friendship groups. You know, if you're deciding what should we do for so-and-so's birthday, it's probably a democratic leadership process. And this builds resonance in people because they feel like they're cared for, that their opinion matters, that, you know, the leader trusts them with the decision, and so they feel good about what happens. Because teams have set their own goals or they've decided together, they're going to be more committed to the outcome. So this works well if you need ideas. If a democratic leader establishes that there's a problem and isn't quite sure how to tackle it, asking the whole group, this is the problem, what do you think we should do, is actually a really good way to get lots of ideas in the ring to work with. It's good when decisions could cause a backlash. So there's a really lovely example in the book of a chain of schools that had run out of funding. And the people at the very top said to the head teachers, you've got to close the schools. They just commanded it. And one school did just that. They took the order, they shut the school, told all the parents, teachers, children, we're shutting, job done. And there was a real uproar and there were arguments and problems. Another head teacher had a meeting with all the parents, students, staff and said, look, we've been told there's no funding and that we have to shut. This is the problem. Has anybody got ideas? And they had meetings and discussions. They looked at the budget and it was useless. And they said, nope, there's nothing we can do. We need to shut. And then the school shut and it was fine. They found people new places. There wasn't any backlash and argument because the decision to close wasn't forced on them. They were part of problem solving. And even though there was no solution, they accepted the final outcome. So this is probably important for you to bear in mind in your SU setting. If you impose a decision without consulting people, you're going to have friction. Whereas using a democratic process to make sure you've heard representative voices and that people are involved is going to be a lot smoother. Because again, you're valuing people's input and people respect that. Democratic leadership is also good when you need details in your plan, because people can help to add what, how, when, where, why, all that kind of stuff. A problem with democratic leadership is it takes a long time. You know, to listen to everybody, you need somebody who can facilitate that well. You need a leader who's actually happy to hear it. You know, I'm sure you can picture a boardroom where the leader says, come on, be honest, do you like my idea? And even though people don't like the idea, they're just going to nod along because they're worried about getting told off. So leaders have to be genuinely open to feedback for this to work. If you use democratic leadership too much, things don't get done, people find it tedious. You know, if every time you wanted to decide where to go for lunch, people had to vote on it and things, or, you know, consult with each other, people would get fed up. The next one is affiliative leadership. I find this the most complex in the sense that this one isn't about tasks as much. I said to you earlier that leadership is a relationship and it's usually about goals. This style of leadership is about saying there's something happening with our people and we need to put down the goals for a bit just to build the harmony up and build the emotional bonds. So this style of leadership is about valuing people's feelings and their emotional needs. This is useful if teams have experienced an issue. So imagine that a team has just had some sort of argument. The manager isn't going to make them all crack on and get straight back to work. They might have a debrief meeting or take a break. There are stories in the book of, you know, workplaces that have suffered a natural disaster or a terrorist attack. You wouldn't expect them to carry on with work. They might need some time to kind of grieve, regroup, get organized, all that kind of stuff. On a more positive end, you know, if it's somebody's birthday, if it's coming up to a religious festival, you're not going to get that much work done. You take some time off to do some team quizzes and just enjoy being with each other. So affiliative leadership is recognizing the importance of those emotional moments. A difficulty of this is that if you do too much of it and there's no focus on the task, you don't achieve the goals. Sometimes people who are overly focused on relationships won't confront issues. And so that can lead to subpar performance. So you can picture, you know, maybe a leader who doesn't want to upset somebody and so doesn't tell them, actually, this work isn't up to standard, I need you to deal with it. So you have to kind of navigate the balance between looking after the emotional relationships and making sure the goals are done to a good standard. The fifth style is coaching leadership. This is a bit problematic because a lot of people have heard of like sports coaches, but sports coaches don't always actually coach, they command. Sometimes they will tell people, you know, you need to run faster, move your leg this way, you need to go into defense, whatever it is. And so that's commanding. Coaching is actually about asking questions, exploring together. It's a very relational way of leading so that you're developing people. So this gets used a lot in kind of performance review meetings where a manager, a leader might say, you know, tell me why you want to work for us and what is it you're excited about and what are your skills and how do you want to contribute? And they're using that to get people to kind of feel cared for, to commit to the team, to be motivated by what's going on in the workplace. So this is really useful for people's long-term growth and support. Coaching and mentoring over time empowers people so that they perform to a higher standard, but they do it slowly and they can do it with more independence. If somebody is always commanded, told what to do, they rely on those instructions over and over again. Whereas coaching usually means that after a while of being coached, you internalize it and you're able to do it yourself. Coaching leadership takes a lot of time. And so there are going to be problems in the short term of people, you know, as they go through trial and errors, they try new things, they might make mistakes. And the biggest problem is, does that person want to be coached? So I've worked with students in an educational setting and kind of said, you know, what do you think this is about? What are you learning? And they just shrug their shoulders. If people don't want to engage, coaching doesn't work. And the leader has to actually coach rather than just command. The last one is visionary leadership, which is about setting an inspiring vision of this is what we want to achieve, you know, help us to get there. And this creates a sense of group pride. It allows for innovation. People feel clear that they know where they're going. This is good if you need a direction, if you want to set a culture. Visionary leadership can be seen a lot in, you know, political movements like the ending of apartheid or, you know, Martin Luther King's speech, I have a dream, is a perfect example of visionary leadership. He's not telling them exactly how to do it. He's just saying, this is what we are aiming for. And people got really excited about that. Again, it's time consuming to set that vision. Sometimes if a vision is too ambitious, people get a bit overwhelmed. They think it's not possible, so they, you know, lose morale. and followers might not know how to get there, so they can feel like they want more direction. A good leader is able to, you know, mix these styles together. So once you've set the vision, maybe you'll use a little bit of the democratic leadership style to come up with a plan, or maybe you'll command people to help set them going. I'm going to launch a quick poll for those of you who are on the call and want to participate. I'm just going to ask one question. What leadership style do you most want to develop in yourself? So you've heard about all 6. You know, you might have noticed, okay, I can do a bit of this one, or I feel like I can do that skill. Which one is a little bit unfamiliar that you want to put more time and practice into? So I'll just leave the poll up for a little bit longer. I can see a couple of people are voting now. And it's really nice. So far, there's 4 in. I know not everybody might use the poll. So I can see one person says pace setting, 1 affiliative, 1 coaching, 1 visionary. So it's nice that there's a mix, which hopefully means that, you know, there's a mix of different styles in the room. The point of me showing you these 6 styles really is to reiterate that no one is better than another. And actually, in the book Primal Leadership, they said the best leaders can flick between them. So maybe you, in a student union setting, your campaign is about setting a vision and getting people excited about what it is you're going to achieve. But then once you get into your role, you have to be very democratic about how you conduct, you know, meetings, about how you consult with students. Within the officer team and the wider staff team, you need that little bit of affiliative so that people get on with each other and work well. Your line managers will be coaching you to make sure that you've got that high level of performance. And at times there will be a need for commanding, and at times there will be a need for pace setting as well. So being able to work on all 6 is really, really powerful. And you'll have one that's your preferred style, and that's fine. Being aware of that gives you the power to say, you know, this is where I'm most comfortable. Is that the best choice for this moment? So I hope that bit makes sense. I'm going to swiftly move on because there's other things that I want to cover with you. So leadership is not a position, it's a set of skills. And the exciting thing is we can learn all of these skills. There's communication, both in public and within teams, handling relationships, building trust, actually managing projects, getting goals done, solving problems and setting a vision. We don't have time today or, you know, even in a week to do all of these things. These are things that you will develop over time. And even if you don't take on a role in the SU, they're skills that will apply to any jobs and community and family and all sorts of other areas of your life. So they're well worth you investing time into. I want to talk a bit more about visioning for those of you who are, you know, thinking of leadership positions within the SU. I love this quote. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up the men to gather wood, divide the work and give orders, which would be commanding leadership, by the way. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. If people are excited about something, they will work harder, they will come with you. And so I just want to go over a couple of things that will help you when you're setting a vision. First of all is about choosing effective language. And I just want you to imagine, so that I've got some words on screen. If you want to close your eyes and say to yourself or listen to me, you are supposed to recycle. You must recycle. You've got to recycle. You need to recycle. You should recycle. You have to recycle. How do you feel? Language is very powerful and language makes us feel things. So often those kinds of words make you feel maybe a bit anxious, maybe a bit guilty, heavy. Sometimes people feel they give them a push. If I say to myself, oh, I must revise, maybe it's that kick up the bum language, or maybe it's determined. But on the whole, these words create heavy feelings. So now, same thing, let's take the idea of recycling, but say, I want to recycle. I'd like to recycle. I'm going to recycle. I will recycle. I can recycle. Probably feels a little bit different. Sometimes people say, you know, they've got that determination. Some people say, you know, well, if I'm saying I'd like to, it gives me choice, which maybe means I'm not actually going to do it. So because it's calmer or more relaxed, maybe they're not as likely to do it, but they don't feel as stressed about it. If you said, you know, I want to do my revision, it might feel a bit, you know, disingenuous. Nobody necessarily wants to. So using the bottom three words, I'm going to, I can, I will, might be more determined. So if you're kind of coming up with a campaign, you can choose the language carefully to decide how you want your audience to feel. The words on the left, you know, the supposed to, should, must, are called away from pain motivation. Somebody might be running away from a tiger. They're running because if they don't, a bad thing will happen to them. They will get eaten by the tiger. The words on the right are words focused on a positive outcome, towards pleasure. So maybe somebody is running because they would love to win a gold medal in the Olympics, or they've said to themselves, I'm going to come third in this race. So this is good for self-motivation. I teach this in a longer session all the time on people, you know, getting ready for exams, job interviews, using language to get themselves psyched up. If you're putting together campaign slogans, if you're thinking about what you want to achieve, there's a big difference between saying to the student body, you know, we must fight for funding for this, or we must open an eco shop. That's going to make them focus on the bad thing that will happen if you don't, which maybe is what you want to do. You know, we must recycle because if we don't, it's a problem for the environment. Or you can go down the route of I'm going to, or, you know, we will do this because this is the good that will come out of it. So think about your framing as a leader, because people will listen to the example that you set. Another thing that you can do to set an effective vision is separate what's called the features and the benefits. So again, with the recycling example, I could use that positive language, we will recycle. And what I want you to do is check your packaging labels, place your rubbish in the corresponding bin, it gets transported to a recycling facility, and then it gets sold to manufacturers to be made for new products. Now, I don't think any of you will be particularly inspired by that. Whereas if I said to you, you know, we've got a policy that we will recycle because we're going to feel good knowing we're doing our bit. We're going to make it easy for everyone at this SU to be sustainable, and we're going to be on the right side of history. Oh, all of a sudden we're feeling a bit more excited now. It may be a bit grand, I might have overdone it, but hopefully what I'm illustrating here is the difference between the features and the benefits. So features are when you're telling your audience what your campaign, product, service is, how it works, the details. And really, humans are very emotional creatures. We don't often care about the details. Some of us may be inclined to research and they might want to know that, but actually the benefits is what captures our imagination and inspires us. The benefits are about how it has an impact on us, on the wider world. It's how it makes people feel, and it's what good will happen. So again, as a leader, yes, you need to tell people what you're going to do, but actually telling them why and what good it will do is a better starting point. It's that, you know, searching for the vast and open sea is the benefit. The features is perhaps how we build the boat, and nobody's excited about the process of building the boat. Good for leadership, but if anybody is thinking about a sales role, this is a really useful skill set to have. And you can also use it in interviews as well, in the sense that, you know, you have features, you've got whatever your degree is, your qualifications, your skills. Yes, your employer wants to know those features, but actually they want to know your benefits. How are you going to help their company? And if you can focus on that when you're doing your interview, that's going to be more powerful for you. Another thing in your vision is having the SMART goals. I won't go through these because you've probably heard them to death. The SMART goals pad out the features. They say, you know, what, how, where, when, all that kind of stuff. This is more about, I guess, in a hustings situation, once you've got your campaign, once you've got the benefits, you've got that motivational language, people are going to ask you questions about how you're going to make it happen, and making sure you know your SMART goal answers is important to give you credibility. So SMART goals isn't what you use to advertise your message, it's the back end evidence to back it up. And so this leans into project management. So again, it's useful for leadership, but the SMART goals model is useful for any goal: personal development, career progression, getting a project done, all that kind of stuff. So with the recycling example, you might say about, you know, this is how many bins we're going to be putting out, this is how the service works, this is the impact that it's going to have, this is how we're going to measure the success of it. I know I've whizzed through that bit on visioning. I hope it makes sense, and I can't see any questions coming through on the chat. So I'm going to press on to the very last bit, which is about, I guess, building trust in leadership. And this is taken from the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. He is a rock star in the world of leadership. I really recommend you look it up. And again, he takes leadership from the point of view of starting with the self and your personal habits first. He talks about something called the emotional bank account, which he says is a measure of the trust built up in a relationship. And it's really important that anybody in a position of leadership, can be trusted. The reason he uses bank account is because then it helps us to get the idea of deposits. So, anytime you do something that builds trust, it's like putting money in the piggy bank. So, this is the first time you meet anybody. If you're kind, if you smile, if you do what you say you're going to do, that person, whether they realize it or not, will feel a little bit warmer to you. They'll trust you a bit more. But you can also withdraw from the account as well by, being rude, disrespectful, being involved in a conflict, ignoring somebody, breaking a promise. And I'm sure you can call to mind lots of examples of leaders in your life and in the public eye that you do trust, maybe because they've enacted the policies they've said, or they communicate in a friendly way. And those who've been caught out telling lies, who, it doesn't sit well with you. So this is a way of just thinking about the way you conduct yourself in your relationships. And Covey talked about 6 common ways that we can build trust. Understanding people. If we understand them, we know what counts as a deposit for them. We know what they value. Look after the little things. So, in a workplace setting, bringing somebody a cup of tea is actually a big part of building trust. And these are the little moments that we're perhaps not having right now as we're working remotely, but sending those little messages and emails to check on people shows that you're thinking of people, shows that you're caring, and helps to build the bank account up. Keeping to your commitments. If you've said you're going to complete a task by a certain time, if you've said there's going to be a particular meeting, sticking to it helps build trust. Clarifying what you expect is important. If somebody says something vague like, can you make this report better? Actually, that's problematic, because what's better for you might not be better for them. So being specific and clear, it actually builds trust because people feel like they know where they stand with you. Showing personal integrity is important in the sense that, I could be I could make a lot of deposits with my friend, but if they then see me gossiping about somebody else behind their back and being mistrustful with others, that friend might think, okay, they're good to me, but how long is it before she turns on me? Whereas if we have integrity, people will trust us, to do the right thing when nobody's watching, like the quote said earlier. And we all will make mistakes. If we actually apologize sincerely, it can reduce the size of the withdrawal, and it can even act as a deposit at times. And again, if you look at politics, this is perhaps one of the things that the public resents the most, is when people have been caught out lying and they don't admit they've been caught out lying. It damages a leader's reputation severely. So I'm aware that we've pretty much gone to time. The bit on bank accounts is just something worth thinking about, I guess, in a role of leadership, but also individually in friendship groups, in any workplace. What kind of behaviours are you doing to build trust with the people around you? So that is an introduction to leadership. I know I've whizzed through a lot of different things there, and as I said at the beginning, there are handouts with, you know, recommended reading if you want to look up more. The things that I really want you to take away is that anybody can demonstrate leadership, regardless of your style, the actual role that you hold. Leadership is about the way you relate to other people, and you can do that from whatever position you're in. The fact that there are different styles means that you have flexibility and options, and the more styles that you can utilize, the better. We've talked about using your language to create an effective vision, and that should hopefully support you in campaigning, you know, or sales or any kind of persuasion, if that's what you want to do. And lastly, we talked about investing in relationships to build trust as a leader, but also just as a colleague and as a friend, you know, just as a member of a community. So I hope you found that useful. I will stick on the call for a bit longer in case people do have other questions. Thank you very much for joining, and I hope that your you know, campaign work or nominations go well. I'm just going to see if Emma wants to announce anything before we kind of let you scoot off for your evening.
Thanks, Gemma. That was really interesting. I hope you all found it a really useful session too.